Welcome to the End of the Road podcast. Each week, we select one story about the Great Lakes region and the tip of Michigan's thumb. These stories are taken from thumbwind.com and presented here so that you can listen to it anytime, anywhere. This week, we will explore the site of a former lumber town that has faded away. But, you can still visit today. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's story from the end of the road. Port Crescent State Park, camping on a ghost town. Port Crescent State Park is one of the largest state parks in southern Michigan. Located at the tip of Michigan's thumb, along 3 miles of sandy shoreline of Lake Huron, the park offers excellent camping, fishing, canoeing, hiking, cross-country skiing, birding, and hunting opportunities. However, a little-known aspect of this park is that it sits on the location of a ghost town. What's in a name? The confusion with Pinnebog. Walter Hume established a trading post and hotel near the mouth of the Pinnebog River in 1844. From these humble beginnings, the area took the name of Pinnebog, taking its name from the river of which it was located. At the time, the thumb was an impenetrable wilderness of thickets and tall forests. The growth of the lumbering town began with the construction of a sawmill in 1851 by Woods and Company. The economy of the town was initially based on the production of finished lumber. Lumberjacks cut and moved the trees in the winter and pushed them downriver in the spring to the company mill. By March, ships would arrive at the dock and the finished lumber would be shipped to towns all along the lower Great Lakes. Christian Schlegelmilch ushered in the start of the agricultural aspect of Port Crescent with the first steam-powered grist mill in Huron County in 1868. The flour that was produced was known for its excellent quality. Around the same time, the U.S. government deemed the town important enough to be assigned a post office. The postmaster named it Port Crescent, noting the shape of the large crescent-shaped beach. Some of the residents objected, preferring to name the town Pinnebog, the name of the river. However, the village of Pinnebog to the south was already established and the name of Port Crescent stuck. In 1871, telegraph service was established, putting the town in touch with the world. Stagecoach service was available on a weekly basis. The 2-day journey ran between Port Austin and Bay City with stops in Seaboing and Port Crescent. The service included the delivery of mail and newspapers. Port Crescent, an industrial powerhouse. The booming lumber town had 2 steam-powered sawmills, 2 salt plants, a cooperage, which manufactured barrels for shipping fish and salt, a grist mill, a wagon factory, a boot and shoe factory, a pump factory, 2 breweries, several stores, 2 hotels, 2 blacksmith shops, a post office, a depot and telegraph office, and even a roller rink. The growing town became an economic resource to the area by employing hundreds of area residents. By 1870 a 1,300-foot well struck salt brine. This started a salt blockhouse operation where they extracted brine by evaporating the water to produce 65,000 barrels of salt annually. Port Crescent used the slash, or leftover limbs, bark, and sawdust for fuel to boil the salt water. A notable fishing industry also started, particularly herring and whitefish. At one time this 17-block village boasted of a population of more than 500. In 1871 the town built its first schoolhouse. It was a 2-story building and noted as one of the largest schools in Huron County. The school could hold as many as 100 students. Port Crescent prospered as a lumber town from about 1864 to 1881. One sawmill became so busy salvaging thousands of trees felled in one of the infamous fires experienced by the Thumb area in 1871 that it added a 120-foot brick chimney to help power the plant. The remains of the chimney are still visible near the state park entrance. In 1881, another fire swept through the Thumb region, destroying the area's timber resources. However, the lakeshore town was spared from the devastating fire. The once prominent town of Port Crescent begins to fade. When the timber in the Pinnebog River basin was gone, the town began to decline. The lumber mills closed, as did the firewood-fueled salt plants. Workers dismantled some of the buildings and an 800-foot dock, moving them across the bay north to Oscoda. Some Port Crescent residents moved their houses to nearby towns. Many of the sturdy buildings were literally taken off their pilings and hauled away to nearby Port Austin, Kindy, Bad Axe and other towns. In 1886, a fire started at the company mill. Lumber stored on site ignited and the flames spread. The fire burned down a big house, the finest home in the city. The mansion was built in 1872 and used by the mill owners and managers. The fire and loss of the big house hastened the end of Port Crescent toward its status as a ghost town. One of the newer buildings was the All Saints Church, built in 1884. By 1907 it too was moved to Kindy by the Lutherans. By 1890 the Huron Grindstone Company had purchased the mill, salt block, and dock of the former Woods and Company. The buildings were dismantled and moved to Grindstone City. Port Crescent switches to sand operations for glass manufacturing. By 1894, all of the buildings in Port Crescent were gone, leaving few traces of the town behind. Nathaniel Bennett Haskell, who owned the sawmill and salt plant on the west side of the river, passed away. Haskell's daughter Elizabeth began to realize the value of the local sand quality for copper smelting and glass making. The Haskell docks quickly became a sand mining and hauling operation. Elizabeth sold her holdings in 1918. By the 1920s the business became part of Sand Products Corporation. The lumber town of Port Crescent was all but gone. It was now truly a ghost town. Sand Products built a huge dock and rail line that enabled 500-foot freighters to dock and load right up at the beach. The unique sand along the beach was exhausted in the 1930s and the operations were abandoned. Today's Port Crescent State Park sits on top of the former town. After World War II, the demand for public use areas along the shoreline stimulated interest for an additional state park in the Thumb. 20 years later, the Michigan Department of Conservation acquired the possession of 124 acres of fine woodland at this place for a new park. Port Crescent State Park was officially established on September 6, 1959. Today little remains of the former town. In the organization's area, just east of the campground entrance, a bit of foundation remains where a structure stood. The lower 10 feet of the old sawmill chimney is a prominent part of the park entrance. Hikers exploring the west side of the park in the trail system can still find evidence of the former lumber town, especially in the spring before the forest floor greens up. This concludes this week's story. We hoped you enjoyed it. Thank you for taking the time to listen to Thumbwin's End of the Road podcast. If you like this kind of story, you are invited to join our 15,000 monthly visitors on our website at thumbwin.com. Please watch for and download next week's story and take a moment to subscribe to our podcast and give us a review. Have a great day.